Hey guys, my name is Moon and welcome back for more Witch on the Holy Night. So last episode, Alco and Alice started their battle with Toko, and yes, very expected that they were losing, especially when Beowulf came. They just lost. So let us continue as Sojuro is actually heading to them, and let's see if he can do anything. His heart was beating faster than normal. The fragmented and disturbing images kept returning and he desperately pushed them to the back of his mind. Oh my god. Oh, that was the Aoko's when she was getting helped by the sister, right? There were thoughts that shook his resolve. He did his best to file them away into an unseen corner of his consciousness. Right now, he could only focus on controlling his breathing and his exertion. Just stay calm, he repeated to himself. He had not stopped for a second since leaving the church, even without giving a thought to what he would do next. So many traffic lights. So many people. It was Christmas. There's no way he would find a taxi. Waiting for one was not an option, so it was why he had to put his trust in his legs. He dashed through the city streets. He had to find a shorter route than last night. His heart was ready to jump out of his chest. Okay, he's here now in the school, pounding like a hammer against a fire bell. He had no intention of giving up yet, but he could not seem to calm himself down. In his precarious condition, even surrender seemed too great of an effort to spare. Visions of horrible outcomes flashed through his mind. No, calm. He needed to stay calm. That was his only weapon. He was painfully aware he was powerless. The best thing he could do was to keep his head on straight. While he wrangled with his mind, his pulse seemed to quicken with every step. The forest was faintly lit by the moon. That was more than enough on such a bare mountain. He followed the two sets of footprints. Ahead lay a situation he had nothing to do with, just like at the amusement park. Even if you go, there's nothing you can do for them. The only effect her admonishing words had was to hasten his pace. He pushed the ground with his legs even harder, trying to leave his doubt in the kicked-up snow behind him. Of course, he was powerless. The pain in his chest told him so. At best, he would be useless, and at worst, he would be a liability. He recalled the binding spell placed on him at the church. It did not matter. His body told him he would regret being torn to pieces less than if he did nothing. Not once did his legs fail him as he ran through the woods, though it felt as though his heart could at any moment. His weakness screamed at him from within. Just like back at the amusement park, he was beyond reason or circumstances now. Ultimately, I just want to help her. That was all he really desired. His heart pounded with vigor. As he ran through the dark, wintry forest, only one thing gnawed at his mind. Not concern for the girls nor anger toward Toko. The red roses bursting from her limbs. Screams of agony like childbirth. The harsh reality of something beautiful dying. The nightmare was tenacious. Never again. Never again did he want to see something like that if he could help it. Just ahead was the forest clearing. The moonlight shone on the old school building like a spotlight. Once again, those thoughts crept back. He could not bear seeing something like that again. That was why he ran. But if he had to face it a second time, how could he stay calm? With that thought in mind, he arrived at the clearing. Somehow his frantic breathing, his rising and lowering shoulders stopped. No exhaustion, no inertia, just blankness, like his mind was frozen in time. This was the second time he felt like this. But the nausea and dizziness from the first time, the pathetic whining of the last few weeks, the doubts clouding his mind, they were all gone. Displaced entirely from his mind by an even stronger emotion. His heart pounded with the force of a sledgehammer. It was a primal sound, loud enough to bring him to his senses. Sojiro stepped into the clearing, letting out a deep but steady exhale. Although his eyes were locked with the blonde-haired boys, his concentration was focused inward. Be calm. Every fiber of his being worked to control his breathing. The clearing told the story of Aoko and Alice's crushing defeat. Aoko was lying face up in the snow. Her right leg bright red and crushed at the thigh. Her eyes were glazed over, but Sojiro could tell she was still bravely fighting. Judging by her spluttering, she had taken a hard blow to her chest or her back. Sojiro deduced it was most likely both. Alice's injury seemed less serious than Aoko, but she lay motionless on the ground and nevertheless. She was lying across from Aoko, face down in the snow, arms out in front as though pushing herself up was too painful. Before the old school building stood the figure of the mage he had seen before. Paying her no mind, Sojiro began to walk forward. Feeling calmer since arriving at the clearing, he advanced toward Aoko. Toko did nothing to stop him. No one noticed, but the faintest look of worry flickered in her eyes.
お兄さんもその人たちの仲間?
The child werewolf spoke amicably, confident in his victory. And perhaps also eyeing up a new meal. Sojiro ignored him and kept walking toward Aoko. The complete disregard wiped the smile from the boy's face. Still, Sojiro carried on, the beast's feeling were the last thing on his mind. Once he reached Aoko, he looked down at her with a pained expression on his face. Strangely, he was at a loss for words. After a slight hesitation, all he could manage to say was,
なってないぞ、生徒会長。行く時ぐらい声をかけるものだろう。
His awkward remark was half scolding and half affectionate.
このバカ。
Despite the pain in her stomach, Aoko was able to throw an insult his way.
安心した。余裕あるじゃないか、青崎。
His voice brightened as if buying her bravado. The truth was that she barely had the strength to live. Despite that, Sojiro looked like he wanted to respond in his usual way. Something like, "See, Aozaki, you're too tough to die even when someone kills you."
あんた。
As soon as she tried to speak, she ran out of breath. Sojiro heard her loud and clear this time. He might have looked absent-minded, but he knew exactly how dangerous the situation was. Aoko knew because his carefree-sounding words did not match his expressionless face.
一体何のつもりで?
Before she could say doing, she coughed painfully. Sojiro pressed his finger to his lips and nodded. Aoko could not quite believe it, but it looked as though Sojiro had gestured to her to not speak.
だってほら、状況はあの時と一緒だ。君がやられたら、次はこっちの番なんだろう。だから協力をしに来たんじゃないか。 まあ何もできないのもあの時と変わってはいないんだけど。
Aoko did not know what to say. She could only look up at him, amazed and awed. The werewolf stared at them, visibly frustrated. After all, he believed himself to be the noblest of all creatures. Ignoring him was treason, punishable by death. Had Toko not been there, he would have sunk his teeth into Sojuro's neck by now. He was sure he had been intimidating enough. However, his prey did not show any signs of fear. It was hard to imagine, but maybe, just maybe, this guy did not view him as a threat.
まあ誰でもいいんだけど、筋張った肉は歯ごたえがあっていいし、何より食い出がある。先にそのお兄さんから始めても構わないよね。
The boy wolf called out once again. Still not responding, Sojuro raised a hand to his nose. Cool, calm, and collected, paying no mind to the boy, yet keeping an eye on him.
匂うな。
Everyone present was confused. No one seemed to be able to smell anything but him.
へえ、何が匂うっていうのかな、お兄さん。
Bayo's voice retained his usual arrogance, but was tinged with impatience. The boy was unable to hide his irritation at being ignored. Finally, Sojuro turned to face the boy just a short distance from him.
品のない肉の匂いがする。これだから犬は嫌いなんだ。
His voice was filled with disgust and contempt. Sojuro was mainly speaking to himself, but the werewolf boy had never felt so insulted, even if that was not Sojuro's intent at all. In a moment, the wind picked up, perhaps signaling a change in the werewolf's mood. A fiery gale whipped around, carving patterns in the snow.
ソジロー。
Sensing he was about to be killed, Aoko desperately tried to move, but her broken body would not respond. After hearing Sojuro's insult, Alice was unsuccessfully struggling to get to her feet too. In complete contrast, Sojuro stood there, firmly and unfazed. The little blonde boy's well of patience had run dry.
そうか。要するに、僕が子供だからって舐めてるんだね。お兄さんは。
His time playing human was over. Enraged, the boy transformed. He grew larger and larger, golden fur sprouting from his pale flesh. His mouth grew razor-sharp fangs, his hands grew claws. Drawing from the magical energy in the air, he transformed into a preternatural beast, a wolf in the shape of a human.
重化の許しは出していないぞ、ベオ。
Toko yelled at him, but the werewolf did not respond. I mean, he got triggered because Sojuro was ignoring him. He only huffed deep breaths of hot air.
そんなバカな話が。
That was all Sojuro could say in response to the boy's metamorphosis. Such a transformation was the stuff of nightmares. What was worse, the beast now towered above him. It was enough to make anybody question reality itself.
驚いた。
Seeing his prey's reaction, satisfied, the werewolf and his maw twisted into a satisfied grin. He was a strange one, this guy, but meat was meat. However, the beast's arrogance was short-lived. The prey breathed a sigh of exasperation before speaking.
それじゃあ本当に犬そのものじゃないか。
I mean, they're shocked because Sojiro is just saying this, right? You could hear a pin drop even in the snow. Aoko and Alice and Toko were all dumbfounded. Because it's pretty much like Sojiro is just mocking him. Were they really seeing a human and not just stare the werewolf down, but insult it to its face? They simply could not believe it. It was too late. Any trace of the wolf's pride or dignity faded away. Not even Toko can control him. The onlookers finally realized that the wolf was serious. But Toko's command fell on deaf ears. The wolf prepared to lunge, his emerald eyes fixed on Sojiro not 30 feet in front of him. A mere 30 feet. Half a second was all he needed. Another half second to bring his claw down and slice his prey from head to toe. A roar of joyous, unbridled fury echoed far and wide. It was the only warning the werewolf gave as he exploded towards Sojiro. 1 second, a golden blur swept forth in a furious gust, too fast for the eyes to follow. In the face of unworldly speed, there was only one thing to do. Sojiro stepped forward, a silent shadow opposite the beastly silhouette of the incoming werewolf. He needed exactly 3 paces. He bet his entire life on around 3 feet of distance. What is he gonna do? In a blink of an eye, death would be upon him. Yet, he did not show the slightest indication he intended to avoid the lunging behemoth. The wolf's foreleg slammed into the ground with earth-shaking fury. His back muscles tensed up so much they seemed barely contained in his frame as he swept a raised paw downward. Sojiro's small step neatly evaded the claws, but he had a different motive. He was merely positioning himself for the next move. His intentions was never to avoid anything. From the beginning, his mind was focused on but one thing. One point to aim for. One mind. One breath. He picked the perfect opening in the wolf's torso, the precise microsecond between contraction and relaxation. That point alone was the crack in the dam of life. He punched the werewolf in its chest with his feeble human strength. Oh! Oh my god, it broke. There was a dull thud and a burst of blood. The twisted flesh and gore were all Sojiro's own. Oh my god. The werewolf's raised claw convulsed. From an insignificant impact, the beast's body was the first to collapse, then his spirit. There was a moment of utter incomprehension. The wolf opened his jaws to try and pull air into his lungs. Gasping, he began to topple forward. The slender figure slipped around to his flank. Look at his arm, man. Look at that. It's destroyed. The next blow pierced him like a spear. Ignoring his mangled left arm, the silhouette whirled around and drove his right elbow into the collapsing werewolf's back. There was another muffled impact. The second strike penetrated to the exact same spot the first strike had, crushing the beast's heart. This time, the blood that flew into the air belonged to the gasping wolf. The werewolf fell to the ground, choking on his own blood. It did not get up. He showed no sign of life. But I told you, man. I told you Sojiro was hiding something. It was over. There was no remorse, no hesitation in that brief act of violence. The perfect, furious golden beast lay still. Failed in a mere 3 seconds. Everyone is shocked. Like, what happened? No sane person would have bet on this outcome. I mean, yeah. Like, look at this. Very, very strong mages. Couldn't do anything to him, right? To Beowulf, but Sojiro, a human. He defeated him. He's breathing calm. The victor stood over the fallen behemoth's body.
なんで僕が
Even as the beast lay crumpled in the snow, he could not grasp what had happened. His heart ruptured, cutting the blood flow to his body and brain, leaving him helpless. That much he knew. If he were a normal creature, he would be dead. As it was, this was a trifling inconvenience. Once his heart was repaired, his body would heal as well. It was not as if he had been struck by magecraft exceeding his own mystical nature. This was a little different than a grazed knee. I mean, they did say though that physical attacks would work on him, right? So yeah, I mean, Soldier's attack was a physical attack. Which is what was so strange. Your heart does not stop from a grazed knee.
思い出さないと
The werewolf frantically searched his memory. He managed to remember right up until the moment he raised his claws. But what had come after? Given the right transformation, he knew he could withstand even a cannon blast, so how had a puny human dropped him? Wait. Before that, he had to figure out exactly what his opponent did to him. The moment he got in close, yes, he had felt a small impact. The attack was so accurate that it probably only affected his heart. Ridiculous. Even if that was possible, there was no way that alone could stop a werewolf's heart. In the end, no matter how much he thought about it, nothing added up. The answer was out of reach for a werewolf with no knowledge of being backed into a corner, let alone the limits of human skill. Only one thing was certain: he had lost. He tried to piece together the sequence of events. The explosion in his chest, the flash of white. After that, as he was falling over, he took another blow to his back. That was the one that disrupted his heart.
ふざけてるそんなことで僕が
Could lose? Indeed. It was physically impossible. The boy gnashed his teeth and tensed his body in indignation at this unfair conclusion.
そうだこんなのは嘘だ同族でだって僕を任せる奴はいなかったこんな痛みもこんな事態も全部嘘だ不合理に狂っているだってこの僕が他の生き物に負けるはずが
Enough thinking. He was ready. From the ground, he glared at his enemy to his side.
負けるはずが
The very next moment, an unknown type of pain coursed down his spine. It had eyes, cold eyes, staring and piercing. Colorless. The moon looked more alive. Its arms were broken. An inhumanly powerful attack had mangled them beyond recognition. If it was in pain, it would have cried out. But it was silent. Was it ever alive? Okay. Those dead eyes. He'd seen eyes like those before. Those eyes without hatred, without joy, without any feeling behind them at all. It was a mindless insect. The werewolf's hair stood on end. What was this creeping chill crawling up his spine? Having never experienced fear, the werewolf did not know what had become of him. Despite countless clashes against other mystics, it had been a human that broke him. He knew beasts even larger than himself. He knew legendary creatures like himself. He did not know this. He'd never met, much less imagined, a human-sized bug. The chill down the werewolf's spine was so vicious it threatened to split him in two. If he moved even an inch, it would crush his skull underfoot. In spite of the despair gripping him, the boy paradoxically sensed that his opponent would not move at all. This human would exhibit no further violence. It was a creature, no, a stone held no animal instinct. It masqueraded as a human. The contradiction grated against his heart, his values. A phantom pain born of an unknown emotion. Fear. It wasn't just grating, it was like many needles slowly digging into his heart. This had been his first taste of doubt of reality. Such contradictions existed in the world after all. They were irrationalities and questions you did not want to hear the answers to. The suppressed pain suddenly flowed through his body like a raging river. This was also a first. Until now, had he always been able to control pain? He had never known what it was like to tremble, and an elemental might have even felt sorry for him if it were here to watch. How sad, born complete yet lost in lunacy. His heart had fully regenerated. Howling in mental agony, the beast clutched his own trembling body. Those eyes, those human eyes looking straight through him. And then the boy realized the only reason he was still alive. Even with both arms broken, the human could have finished him off with its legs. But it mattered not, because his opponent was giving him a taste of his own medicine. This was not revenge for trying to kill him. This was revenge for the wounds he inflicted on the girls. The absurdity of it all made his throat tighten. His breathing was frantic. This human had no sense of self. It had no concern for its own safety. When it stood between him and the girls, that must be why it had no hate or fear or perhaps even intent to kill him. Indeed, the fact that he was still alive had nothing to do with the human's will. The fight was machine-like, so was its judgmental. An eye for an eye and nothing more. If the werewolf had killed one of the girls, this exchange would have ended differently. He shuddered at the thought. Like, it's insane, man, how simple what Sojourner did, right? And yes, Beowulf is panicking right now. He had never entertained such a possibility. He had never had to because he was supposed to be the one exception to that rule. Agony kicked him hard in the gut. No matter the mystic, nothing was immune from injury, from decay. The boy finally understood an obvious law of the world, or rather he had been taught. Those eyes, they would not stop staring down at him. Retribution was a universal law. He was now painfully aware of that fact. And yet, the one who brought form to this idea was this human. The pain of defeat, the pain in his heart, the pain of comprehending the incomprehensible. Pain. The impossibility of it all shattered his perfect world. It ate at him, consumed every fiber of his being. The doubt made his head spin. It was too much. Humans were impossible to understand. He had not been made to face death of another but his own. Unable to cope, he reverted to his human form. Quietly. He shivered like a frightened child in a mother's lap. He tasted fear for the first time. Still lying in the snow, Aoko choked on her words, unable to entirely comprehend what had unfolded.
宗十郎、あんた。
She could not hide the trembling in her voice.
何？
I mean, dude, no one would expect this though. Speaking in his usual way, Sojiro nonchalantly turned toward her.
何って、今自分が何をしたか分かってんの？
She shouted angrily as though he had done something wrong. Sojiro looked surprised, wondering what on earth he had done to upset her. He lowered his gaze back to the wolf boy, and knitting his brow in dismay, Sojiro finally realized what Aoko was referring to.
心外だな。青崎は分かってると思ってた。
I thought you knew. He looked at her in disappointment.
分かってるって何をよ。
Feeling slightly affronted, Aoko responded curtly. Sojiro sighed.
山じゃ熊はそう珍しいものじゃない。以前確かに言ったじゃないか。
は？
This thing is much stronger than a bear. And even so, like if there's a bear in the mountains, so what? Ako's jaw dropped. It took her a moment to process what he had just said. She recalled some meaningless conversation or other from who knows when.
君、もしかして俺をバカにしているのか？まったく、なんで熊を倒すためなんかに修行しなくちゃいけないんだ。
Yes, now she thought about it, they had spoken about that. He'd mentioned being familiar with large beasts, and she couldn't deny she'd heard him utter something anachronistic nonsense about training to deal with him. Which meant he was used to dealing with animals larger than himself. If he'd lived that sort of life that involved run-ins with wild bears, then a man-wolf might only have been surprising but not particularly frightening. Aoko hung her head. After all this time, who was it that really made no
参っ
sense?
たわ。あなたの勝ちよ、宗十郎。
It was hard to tell whether she spoke in admiration or exasperation. Either way, as she slouched in the snow, Aoko spoke quietly, enough so only she could hear her words. Toko, on the other hand, understood exactly what had transpired. Bayo lay fallen, now just a sobbing boy. And another boy stood over him with two shattered arms. Near fatally wounded, Aoko and Alice still could stand, but had recovered enough to breathe. As for Toko, she had only a few tricks up her sleeve and maybe 3 or 4 more runes at best. The magic crests on her back were unusable. She could use the remaining magical energy from the field imprisoning her grandfather, but that would be stupid. If she released her grandfather, she would lose ownership of the sacred ground. Failing to defeat Aoko and Alice now would mean starting over from square one, and she could not afford that. The sibling rivalry had to end. Toko had gambled everything on her surprise attack. Using the fact was still an Aozaki to infiltrate Misaki's defenses. For 3 years, she had labored selling her work to the association. And she had used 20 years worth of hair to mobilize an army of familiars. It was now or never.
だが、私は失敗した。
She had overestimated the werewolf's power. It should have been enough. I mean, yeah, you won already though, but then Sojiro came and then defeated you. Against mages alone, Beowulf himself would have been enough to ensure complete victory. But things did not always go according to plan. Beo's incredible strength was conditional. She knew he was not infallible, so why hadn't she prepared a contingency plan? Her heart as cold as ice, Toko stared Sojiro, who stood tall. His arms were a hideous mess. The arm he used to strike Bayo head-on barely even resembled an arm. His bones were bent out of shape, his muscles were torn to shreds. To say his arm was simply broken would be a gross understatement. Streams of crimson run down his other arm onto the white snow. The elbow he drove into Bayo's back was likely shattered and his muscle and tendons torn up to his shoulder. Judging from the state of his arms, it was doubtful he would be able to use them again. Worse than his arms were his left leg and no doubt his internal organs too. He had used the leg to take the full brunt of Bayo's charge. At a glance, it looked fine, but it was now just a useless hunk of meat attached to his torso. His insides were worse, supporting the weight of Bayo had ruptured his spine, causing widespread internal bleeding. Basically, he was a dead man standing. A bird with clipped wings. Living like that would not be living at all. He could barely stand, let alone fight again. In contrast, the collapsed werewolf was unscathed. Only once had he coughed up blood. The majority of the pool of red on the snow was Sojiro's. A crimson tapestry telling the story of the boy who stood strong and defeated a werewolf.
当然だ。衝撃には反動が伴う。拳を振るうのなら相応の負担がある。まして相手は人狼。走ってくる鉄の壁を真っ向から殴るようなものだ。それを。
Perhaps he had known what would happen. Animals instinctively limit their strength in order to protect their body. Compensating for physical weakness with intellect and technique was humanity's forte, and that clash had shown humans at their very best, and yet it had also been beyond human. He had attacked without concern for his own safety. Without self-preservation in mind, he could go beyond human capability. Yeah, like he was unconscious when he was attacking, is what I'm saying. Like he just did it. Like he didn't care if his arm would be destroyed. No, he just attacked. And then attacked again in the back without thinking of anything. Enough to strike through the steel-like fur of a legendary werewolf. But who would have thought that a beast able to withstand a shot from a tank would be felled by a mere human?
いや、違う。ためらうことなく殴りつけたから壊れたのではない。初めからあれは壊すことを前提にしていたな。
He sacrificed his entire body to destroy Bayo's heart. Toko felt a chill come over as she went over in her head what had transpired. It should have been a nightmarish scene, but she was captivated by that supreme display of physical rationality. From the outside looking in, she had witnessed not an accident, but a rational consequence. In that instant, the boy had put his entire being into piercing Bayo's chest. As soon as he laid eyes on Aoko and Alice, he had committed himself fully to the task. He sized up Bayo, synchronized his breathing, found his weak point and calculated the exact position, timing, and distance he would need to hold his ground. He knew what he had to do to win, and did it with everything he had. It had nothing to do with instinct. A wild creature would have not tried to beat something it could not. Only a human would risk his life when faced with the impossible. That contradiction fed his attack. He twisted his body from his heel to his neck to focus his energy. If Bayo had simply tried to run Sojiro down, the werewolf would probably have won. But the beast wanted to rip him to shreds. Or rather, he was baited into doing so. After Bayo charged when he planted his feet, he raised his claw and swung it downward, putting himself off balance. His pulse was erratic, his movements wild. In that moment, he was vulnerable. That was when Sojiro made his move. The beast had overwhelming power, but it was sloppy. Whereas the human concentrated all of his meager power into a single point. That was how the human shifted the balance in his favor. The follow-up elbow attack would rupture Bayo's heart. It was a Grace's second strike. A sloppy blow no different from Bayo's. The elbow was only able to penetrate the beast's golden fur because of the first attack to his chest.
あの時点でベオは丸裸にされていた。無敵の人狼がその機能の一切を休止させられた。つまり
The strike was not meant to break but to disable. All living creatures had weaknesses. No matter how strong the creature, it had weak points and weak moments. Not just physically, but mentally too. At a time when they aren't in their best shape, unable to focus or find motivation, sickness or lack of sleep, or food for example, can cause the body's rhythm to go out of sync. For a variety of reasons, intelligent beings risk losing their ability to function properly. Legendary beasts were no exception.
弱点、欠点をつく魔術なら知っているが、全てを投げ打って弱点を生むとはな。
And done by a human as well. The boy's strike to the heart was not an attempt to kill Bayo. It was designed to create a weakness in something that had none. The elbow attack took advantage of that break in Bayo's invulnerability.
加えて、笑えることに不意打ちですらない。ベオの神経の伝達速度なら、毒が当たった瞬間に感知し対応できる。だが、そもそもそれを毒と認識できなければ、変形のしようもない。毒ではないものが毒になるなんて落とし穴を誰が教えてやれるものか。
She was frustrated to say the least. The boy was solely committed, utterly selfless. He bet his life on that single moment without expecting a single thing in return. That boy had acquired the experience and skill to do such a thing. It was not a miracle of luck, nor a miracle of passion. It was not talent, tenacity, or hatred. Without constant, intense training, no one could destroy their own body on a whim like that.
子供には相手が悪かったようね。
Seeing Bayo cowering in the snow, Toko was disappointed in her own lack of foresight. She had to use him for his talent alone, ignoring his inexperience. If Bayo was not a child, his life experience might have given him the strength to bounce back and devour Sojiro after regenerating.
ベオを責めるべきか、それとも君を評価すべきなのか。
Toko quietly lifted her left hand. Nobody noticed. Standing far away, the boy standing there looked like a hunter from a picture book. He had a slender build, but that was likely because he intentionally shed any excess. Given what she just witnessed, his cluelessness had to be part of an act of a hunter. As she thought to herself, she suddenly remembered. The first thing that crossed her mind the first time they spoke.
そうだったな。だが、それは忘れていたかったよ、宗十郎君。
No sooner had she felt a slither of sentiment, she returned to her unshakable resolve. She was raised as their heir to the Ozaki household, taught never to question the morality of her actions. That was why, even now, she knew exactly what she had to do.
でも、よかった。
Sojiro muttered, unmoving perhaps because of the pain in his broken arms. He did not look at Aoko. Instead, his gaze was focused on Alice, who was lying prone on some away. Aoko thought he looked lonely.
よかったって何がよ。
She asked, spurring him on. They were mere steps from each other, but close enough to touch hands. And their quiet voices carried in the stillness.
私たちが無事だったからなんて言ったら怒るわよ。
She was not joking. Sojiro turned away from her, slightly shaking his head.
口にするのは3度目だけど、青崎の心配はしていないんだ。いや、さっきはちょっと意識が飛んだようなんだけど。
He said as an embarrassed smile across his face. I like how they're having just a normal conversation here. Like, Sojiro just defeated the werewolf, right? But, I mean, it's still dangerous because Toko is still there and, yeah. And now they're just having a normal talk. He just calmly did what he could as best as he could. Nevertheless, no matter how calm he tried to be, deep within festered a very real rage.
じゃあ何が良かったのよ、宗十郎。
Aoko's voice had a slight tinge of annoyance. Sojiro responded.
だって、ようやく約束が守れた。そっちだけが約束を守ってるのに、こっちは果たせなかっただろう。それがずっと気になっていたんだ。その機会があって、本当に良かった。
His relief expressed itself as a small but a heartfelt smile. Aoko listened, astonished. For a moment, she could not recall what promise Sojiro was talking about. When she remembered what he was talking about, what she had told him all that time ago in the amusement park, her mind went blank.
あいつをやっつけるのに協力したら、俺のことは見逃してくれる？
He proposed a deal, but in the end, he hadn't been any of use. It must have been eating away at him this entire time. Aoko had considered the agreement binding, but only for herself.
あんなどうでもいいことを。
She muttered in disbelief. Sojiro gave a nod and affirmed with a tiny voice.
約束は自分のために果たすものだって教えてくれたのは青崎だ。だから君が守っている限り俺も守らないといけない。はあ、ずっと俺はそうしたかったんだ。
As if listening to a confessional, Aoko stayed silent. She could not find the words to say anyway. Sojiro proved ever the enigma. Taking such trivial promise and speaking so sincerely about something so basic, she could not wrap her head around how he had beaten a werewolf, but his personality, that was the true mystery. It was no use trying to figure that out now. To Aoko Ozaki, he was a riddle wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a conundrum.
それじゃあ 借りは返したから帳尻はゼロだ。これで貸し借りはなしだぞ、青崎。
Sojiro said lightly, perhaps attempting to break the silence. Normally this would have passed her by, but she knew his kindness for what it was.
貸しがついたのはこっちの方よ。これじゃあどうやって返していいかわからないじゃない。
Sojiro nodded in happy agreement.
それより青崎の足なんか塞がってるな。もしかしてもう立てるのか？
She shot him a stubborn look as to say, well duh, obviously. Ever amazed by her grit, he offered her his right hand. Despite being broken at the elbow, to Aoko it looked as sturdy as ever. By all appearances, he was beyond recovery and would be for the rest of his life. Even so, he seemed able to ignore the pain for Aoko's sake.
ほんと、あんたってバカ。
She uttered underneath her breath, looking up at him. As much as she hated to admit it, she could not refuse his hand. Resigning herself as she reached out to Sojiro. But her hand never reached his. A small bell chimed. A line of wind whipped through the air. It cut through his waist like a guillotine. Are you serious right now? Who did that? Pieces began to fall. Oh my god. What were those things dropping before her eyes? Aoko could not remember who they belonged to.
Sojiro?
Who did that? That used to be his name, right? The name of whoever lay in the red snow in front of her. Oh my god, are you serious? Don't tell me Sojiro is really dead. His face now rested on the ground beneath her chin. The smell of a viscera assaulted her nostrils. A river of blood flowed from what used to be a stomach. It happened so fast, too fast for her mind to process, in fact. Her only solace was he probably did not suffer. How could she think that so calmly, especially what she had witnessed? Her blood boiled at her own stupidity. Which begged the question, how should she treat the one who did this? Was it Toko? Was it Beowulf? Did he recover already? She had used all her anger on herself. She had none left to give anyone else. What this hatred was hers and hers alone. Her problem was this. Could she muster the emotions from this drought of anger? She was not sure, but the thought of hunting them down made her smile unconsciously in anticipation. Aoko turned to the old school building to where Toko was standing with her arms out in front of her. She had used the same rune magecraft she'd used against Aoko and Alice, except Sojiro had no magic crest. Toko's amber's eyes were narrowed, staring intensely at the fallen corpse. As to what she might have been feeling, Aoko could not care less. Even if Toko felt regret, Aoko would never forgive her for as long as she drew breath.
やはり君からこうしておくべきだったな。
Did Toko earlier, saying to Beowulf, do not kill him. And now she killed him. Toko was not speaking to Aoko but to the dead body. There was no response, no clouds of breath. Coming to terms that he was truly dead, Aoko pushed herself up to her feet.
案外無様ね。
Did he really die? Oh my god, are you serious right now? Facing her sister in the distance, Aoko spoke hoarsely.
でも正しい選択だわ。これで勝負はやり直しだもの。
She turned away from Sojiro and stared at Aoko. They stood far apart. Farther apart than their positions made them seem. Though there was nothing left to say, the two of them exchanged words in respect of the fact that they were once sisters.
ああ、魔術刻印という私の切り札はこの通りで、人狼というカードもお前の切り札の前に敗れ去った。だが そちらも刻印を使い切り、彼も今息絶えた。互いに決定打はなくなったわけだ。
そうね。私も甘かった。人狼が再起不能になった時点で、あなたが敗北を認めたなんて勝手に思い上がるんだから。本来ならそうなるんだけど、あなたがそんなに諦めがいいのなら、この町に戻ってきはしないものね。本当に甘かった。
It was clear to Toko that Aoko was trying to suppress her emotions. Aoko was right though, her sister had counted on Beowulf to succeed. As mages, no matter what cards Aoko or Alice had in their hands, they were helpless against a werewolf. But then Sojiro had shown up and Toko couldn't win as long as he was around. Unfortunately though he had stopped the werewolf, he had been defenseless against a mage. So she had to kill him. With Sojiro out of the way, no one could hold Bayo back. It would take time for him to recover, but as long as his wounds were only mental, that could be overcome. Alice and Aoko could try to attack again before he recovered, but Alice was being kept in check by the poison, so Toko still had the advantage. Stalemate still, the battle would drag on. Unless Aoko were to use it. But is she gonna transform? Powdery snow began to whirl around. Look at Aoko's eyes, man. The air around her wailed. It was magecraft that transcended all that was mystical. The gate to miracles beyond human comprehension ready to show itself.
やる気のようね、青子。
Dude, you literally killed Sojiro. Come on. Toko released the crest maintaining the fields. With that, her grandfather would be freed and the barriers around Misaki would be restored. Which was not what Toko wanted, but it was that or forfeit her life. The crests at her disposal were now twice as powerful as her sisters. Aoko gazed at this new threat with her eyes half closed. None of this was her concern. Far removed from the situation, she was searching for something hidden, deeper inside herself, desperate to reach it. There it was, an odd feeling like picking up algae. It was not the fire of emotion, it was not solid nor great. It must have been people meant by rising to the occasion. Abandoning the thought itself, Aoko held on to that feeling as she stared at her enemy.
いいわよ、トウコ。
She spoke softly, yet more loudly than a scream.
お望み通り、本当の魔法を見せてあげる。
Focusing her power into the dim crest on her right arm, she weaved the words. A single incantation. A final heartfelt farewell. A brilliant blue-colored magic taking time back to when a certain someone had been blessed. To put it simply, it is the wisdom as we know it. Magic is a singularity that exists beyond either of those. At the beginning, the first change all. Okay. Next, the second recognized many. In answer, the third showed the future. Tether the fourth concealed itself. And the final fifth had long since lost its significance. Someone once said, had it only ended at the third, magecraft is the study of history. Feats of our making and life orbiting the planet. But true magic is the providence of a god beyond the heavens. Why do those who stand on the earth extol the virtues of miracles beyond humankind and the planet? This was an undeniable sin. Magic was the enemy of humanity. That is why those who obtain a new magic are killed by the Red Shadow.
聞け万物の霊長
Aoko's voice resonated and high above the winter sky. The air began to fracture, turning the scenery to broken glass. Toko wondered whether she should fight or flee. She decided to try and keep her feelings in check and see this through. But the object of her obsession, her so many years, was right in front of her. Rationality was slipping from her grasp. Both of their fates were now uncertain. Toko had an overwhelming advantage when it came to her crest and terrain. When it came to true magic, however, if the Ozaki magic was anything like Alice Kawonji's fairy tale monsters, then mage strength was not part of the equation. Okay. At this point, it was Toko against magic itself, and there was no winning against truth. The transcendence and idiosyncrasy of true magic rendered things like magecraft irrelevant.
だが
Toko stared at her sister, wondering if she could actually use it. Her proclamation lacked conviction. She had raised her voice, but that was out of discipline. It had not been the arrogant conviction to sacrifice someone else for her own gain. Having not been chosen to inherit it, Toko could not imagine what the magic in her sister was. Only that it was a force violent enough to change the world. No human mind could withstand the audacity required to make an enemy of the world itself. Especially not someone as indecisive as her sister. The power of magic would surely cripple her.
そりゃね
Feeling Toko's eyes on her, Aoko doubted herself. She could not help but hesitate. Terror gripped her heart tighter.
でも
She could not run away forever. Her hesitation and terror meant she would never forgive herself for stopping now. Closing her eyes, she pushed herself into the final stage. Time stopped like a light being switched off. She submerged herself in her own darkness. Everything froze, only she moved. Everything around her disappeared as she passed a limitless stream of stars. As soon as she did, she wanted to disappear into the empty thoughtlessness place she arrived in without any answers. Not again. The Red Shadow will surely come this time. Suddenly, I saw a new memory. Possibly because I used another to make the trade for. I heard a familiar yet new sound. I wish for nothing. I seek nothing. Only to fuse with a consciousness that hurls backwards in time to zero. This sound, the bitter sad meaningless, pulls me by my hair. But I have to resist. The red ghost was always going to be my biggest hurdle. I must forget the value of life. I must forget the dignity of death. The sound persists. It's got nothing to do with this journey. It's just an external distraction. And yet, I think I finally understand. I know what noise has been making me so uneasy. What the? The unsettling whispers were directed at me. Or perhaps the red shadow was perplexed by the quiet soul listening to it. It glares at me, its eyes full of hatred. How could I be so unprepared? Don't tell me. You can't be serious. You're going to turn me into your prey for that? That is your everything. You have nothing else. What is happening? The effect of rewinding, the decision to never say never. His prime, his meaningless life. She negated it. She used her superior power to negate the sound, which was an absolute rule to him. Just brush it aside like it was a cobweb. The sound disappeared, a new one replaced it. I wish for nothing, I want nothing. A pure obedient heart. That's why you get nothing. A life of falsehood led by affirmation. This is ridiculous. My legs move toward the future, but they stop. Change of plans, I'm taking a different path. Nothing's changed, it's just something has made me real mad, so how can I put it? You can call this the past, you idiot. If I don't complain about something to someone, I'll explode. Even if it's just the voice or to who hears it. Or to the part of me who just stays quiet and watches. Or to the one who did that to him. With no answer, I opened my eyes. Alko released everything she had dragged up. As for what was there or what she saw, she could not remember. All she held on to was the fury that burned into her heart. Pushed on by something she did not know when she opened the door to magic. The change was extraordinary. Beneath her, the snow vanished and replaced by a small patch of lush, green grass. This ground had never existed under the frozen blanket and had been rewritten into a new landscape. The very elements rejected her as if the world itself was fighting back. The electrical discharge lashed at her body. The miracle threatened to destroy the world. The world had to protect itself. It moved to expunge her. Pain scorched her every cell, trying to tear away her consciousness. But she did not falter. All this pain and his loneliness was to take her to the roots. Ever since inheriting true magic, she had suffered this torture time and time again. She consented against the voiceless protest of the cosmos. The burden engulfed her retinas and nerves in flames. And then, the light. She finally understood. She remembers why she came back and what she wanted to scream. A censoring voice told her to stop. At the edges of oblivion, her hand touched the true form of magic. The snarling red shadow was there, telling her it was no use. So much doubt, so much fear, but such things mean nothing to her, to me. I don't care about a magician's obligations or the destruction of mankind. I'm sick and tired of hearing about it. I only have one reason for doing anything right now. God, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. I just want to save him.
No, say.
All is not sane, yet all shall be bright. Alright. A blue whirlwind whisked up around her. Casting aside her doubt and sorrow, the magician played her trick upon the world. Was so bright now. Time flowed backward. Childhood memories were overwritten. White flowers appeared as the eye could see. Brighter than snow, they rippled like a wave across the world, devouring it. Well, she got white hair now. No, not white, red hair.
5 timeless words.
What was declared had come to be. In this time and place alone, the fifth magic made itself known. In the blink of an eye, the snowy clearing had transformed. A sea of fully bloomed white flowers blanketed the grounds. Only the dilapidated school building and the bare winter trees signified this was the original world. The once cold wind now blew with a pleasant warmth across the landscape. Even the night sky was once again teeming with the stars. If one reached out, one could almost touch them. It was a mix of comfort and solitude, quiet enough to carry the sound of insects flying through the air. A scene far removed from impurity and grief of humans. A world with nothing, yet one that needed nothing. It was his most precious memory. The winter tundra had changed into a spring meadow. Aoko's so-called true magic confused Toko. Sure, it was pleasing to the eye, but she wanted to see something less idyllic. Aoko's spell was clearly no small feat, but the surrounding mana had not changed. Better to be confused, though, than deal with something like this Alice Kuonji's flat snark. The only changes seemed to be the flower field and Aoko's appearance. She seemed to have received some enhancement to her physical form, but it would never be enough to match Toko.
確かに魔法といえば魔法だが
Toko said with a hint of annoyance.
あいにくとお互い夢見る年頃ではないんだまさかそれで終わりではないだろ
Aoko began walking through the sea of flowers. But she was not heading toward Toko.
いえ、これでおしまいよ。私も、あなたも。
Aoko's words sent a wave of unease through Toko. Her sister's voice seemed different somehow. It was mostly the same in pitch, so it had to be the tone. No, that was the same too. Something was off, so could it be? It was then Toko noticed something else had changed. Not just Aoko in the clearing. The severed body lying at Aoko's feet, it was now whole. Corpse reanimation, wound healing. It did not look like Aoko had used a significant formula, and besides, regenerating a body did not bring it back to life. Since the dawn of time, even true magic has never been able to bring back the dead. But the body of the boy behind Aoko was moving. It was breathing like it was taking a nap.
死者の蘇生が青崎の魔法いや違うあれは蘇生というより
Before she could think of an answer, Toko realized what had seemed out of place to her before. Aoko's mannerism appeared beyond her years. Her appearance had changed ever so slightly, but beyond there had been a change from within. By the time Toko arrived at the seemingly impossible conclusion, Aoko had closed a distance between them.
タービンセット
Aoko raised her left hand to eye level. Toko could not see nor hear the magical energy generating inside Aoko. It was a sound Toko had never heard before. Aoko only possessed a single function, a low-grade circuits, no better than any third-rate maid, so she generated magical energy at a much lower rate than Toko. However, the speed was absurdly quick, moving even faster than the blood pumping through her body. Magecraft could vibrate, but how in the hell were the activated magic circuits audible? Even the association had never heard of such a thing.
我が目前に勝利ありき。
Spurred to action by the sudden dread she felt, Toko hurriedly carved runes into the thin air. Toko summoned the divine protection of victory, Tear, to surround herself with a barrier which was further enhanced by her crest. Paying it to no mind, Aoko held her arm steady, not moving it up to strike her targets directly.
まだ展開
Aoko commanded herself succinctly. This was beyond magecraft. In just a few words, she had fired 20 magic bullets. Like a meteor shower, the bullets smashed through the rocket-proof rune barrier as well as Toko's spell-woven coat. The protective runes aligning her coat screamed they would not be able to take another barrage like that, and she had already taken internal injuries. She loathed to admit it, but Aoko vastly outclassed Toko in terms of raw power. Even harder to admit was that her sister probably had not even brought out the big guns yet. Jumping backward, Toko drew more runic symbols into the air. In response, her crest burned brightly. But with a single word, Aoko nullified the runes, dissolving them before they could be given meaning. The power of Aoko's words has surpassed the magical energy of Toko's rune magecraft. With the runes nullified, Aoko continued advancing through the white flowers. From her calmness to the robust spinning of her magic circuits and her breathing, she was different. A woman with sublime self-control, a trait only found in mages with a lifetime of combat experience. Given the evidence, that was the only explanation for the Ozaki magic. Aoko's magic circuits had not been amplified. That would have been impossible anyway. Like Toko, she would have to externalize them, which would just increase the scope of her magical energy and techniques. By nature, the quality of a mage's magic circuits did not change, but Aoko was now clearly superior or a superior mage to Toko. So there was only one logical conclusion. Look at that. In an instant, she had grown from an amateur to a veteran. She fast-forwarded her own time. The scarred red mage turned her back on her sister and ran. She knew she could not win, so she fled toward the old school building. Aoko did not fire. Not out of pity, but because she deduced that an attack at this range was risky. She went to chase after her sister, but stopped suddenly. A few words caught in her throat. She took a small breath.
Alice, そいつお願い
Watch him. She said, slightly embarrassed by the maturity of her voice. White petals flitted through the air. Without looking back, she made after Toko, her long hair flowing behind her. Damn, look at Aoko, man. She's so strong now. Extremely strong.
あれ
Okay, so let's take a break here. A lot of things happened today, yeah. I thought it was gonna be only Sojiro. But yeah, he did something. He died, and now he's back. So, Aoko's true magic is insane. It made her stronger. Made Sojiro come back as well. So let's see what happens. But damn, like Toko did kill Sojiro though. She really did kill him. Because yeah, she saw Sojiro was a threat towards Beowulf. If someone can stop Beowulf, it was Sojiro. Like he did a very simple thing. I mean, a simple thing like in terms of like a human. Like he had a technique that he did. It shattered his arms, but he won. Like I doubt he could still fight though anyways, right? I doubt he could still fight against Beowulf if Beowulf had recovered. I don't think Sojiro could do anything anyways because his arms were pretty much shot already. But Toko still killed him. But yeah, I guess that was a trigger for Aoko though, for her to use her true magic there and then transform. And her hair is red now. Basically, she's a Super Saiyan. So let's see what happens next episode. Honestly, this is really cool. What is Sojiro gonna do? We'll find out. So yeah, Beowulf is pretty much sidelined now. He was traumatized because he lost, right? Okay. So anyways, we are gonna continue this and do more of Witch and the Holy Night in the next one. So I'll just see you then, guys. Bye bye.